Hi everyone, I'm Raoul Pal, and welcome to my show, The Journeyman, where I travel on a journey to the nexus of crypto, macro, and the exponential age of technology. Now, a lot of my recent videos have been on crypto, but we've obviously just had Rick Reader, macro, and you'll have a whole selection as we go, as I try and shuffle you all along these convergent narratives, because if it wasn't for the macro, the crypto world would never have happened. Satoshi would never have written a white paper. If it wasn't for blockchain technology, which forms part of the exponential age thesis, it would be incomplete. But that thesis, the AI thesis and what is happening in robotics and how robots and AI together replace humans in the workforce, comes into the macro picture and how that changes, and why I think we get to this idea of an economic singularity where we don't really understand how economies work anymore, because they're usually anchored by that magic formula: population growth plus productivity growth plus debt growth. Well, the debt growth bit stopped. The population growth has been shrinking across the world. Now, when you add AI and robots, it can scale infinitely over time. So what does that mean for GDP? What does it mean for businesses? A lot of this I will discuss more and more on this channel. But blockchain and crypto is really at the core of how I see the opportunity set. As I've said, it's the biggest macro bet of all time. And I am a multi-chain person. I believe in a world where many people are building incredible technologies on top of the internet and on top of Satoshi's original white paper and blockchain technology. And it's going to solve different use cases. You see, there is a lot of nuance and change between the different protocols, and those allow different use cases for different industries. And that's what really excites me. When I first saw crypto or Bitcoin back in 2012, I started thinking we can build the financial system on top of this. But my vision has become much bigger than that now. When we started to realize that every contract, once smart contracts came out with Ethereum, we realized that we could do a lot more with this. In fact, this was the whole value layer of the internet. It's like this immutable layer of this massive distributed database that can be used for so many things. And that's really, really powerful stuff. Now, obviously, I try and take you on that journey here on The Journeyman, and make sure, please, that you subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on this journey. It's a really important journey. I'm doing it for me, and I'm doing it for you. So make sure you subscribe. Additionally, obviously, there's a lot more of this conversation that goes on in Real Vision. So once you've subscribed to this channel, I just urge you to go across to realvision.com, the link's below. Realvision.com, you'll have a whole world, the platform, so that gives you the knowledge, the tools, and the network to help you succeed in this journey, to allow you not to fuck this up. So realvision.com, really important place to go, because there's a lot of crypto content, macro content, technology content, and there's an incredibly vibrant community in over 100 countries around the world, with regional group chats, meetups, all sorts going on. Incredible new trade idea templates are coming, so everyone's sharing ideas with each other. A lot there, plus AI, obviously, as well. Anyway, so realvision.com, do that, subscribe to the channel, and let's get on with this week's interview. This is a special one because this is with a real OG of this space, Gavin Wood. Gavin needs very little introduction. We'll get his story, and his story is an incredible one. But also, Gavin's a great thinker, he's a great technologist, and he sees the opportunity set to evolve this space even further. He's been at the forefront of evolution in this space over the years, with Ethereum, then Polkadot, and now where he's going on this journey too. So anyway, enjoy this interview with Gavin from Polkadot. Join me, Raoul Pal, as I go on a journey of discovery through the macro, crypto, and exponential age landscapes. In The Journeyman, I talk to the smartest people in the world so we can all become smarter together. Gavin, fantastic to see you on Real Vision.
Thanks. Nice to be here, Raoul.
Look, there's a lot I want to talk to you about, but for those people who don't know you, and you've probably done this 1,000 times, but your story of your journey to where you are today is a hell of a story. So if you don't mind going back in time and giving us the story.
Right. Where do you want me to begin? Where are we talking from?
I think before Ethereum,
Before
how the hell
Ethereum.
you got into this in the first place? Because that's always, I find it really interesting. There's always some little hook that gets people in, and then before you know it, they go so far down the rabbit hole. So let's start with that.
Well, I was always pretty interested in economics and game theory. I studied computer science at university, but my first sort of Bitcoin sort of glimpse into the world, I guess, was in 2013 when I was reading an article about Amir Tarki, this Bitcoin is a coder for one of the Bitcoin projects, and a sort of self-confessed sort of cypherpunk and a crypto anarchist. And he seemed like a bit of a very bright light, let's say. And I figured it would be quite fun to sort of meet up with him and get his take on the world. And I was sort of interested in contributing a bit to the Bitcoin project right then. I wrote an email just called
What kind of year was this?
This is like must be February, March 2013.
Right.
And I just wrote him an email, and he replied, and I met up with him in London at a squat. First time I've been to a squat. And he introduced me to a couple of other, several other Bitcoin people. He initially introduced me to Mihai Alisi and his girlfriend, Roxana, who, he sort of opened this door and they were there on the mattress of a bed. And she was just sort of plonked on the floor in an office room. I mean, this squat was like an office building. And I was a bit like surprised to be introduced to someone in bed. So I quickly said hello, and we moved on. But with Mihai would later become a co-founder of me with Ethereum. So it was a bit of an odd first meeting. But then he introduced me to a couple of other people, a couple of sort of Bitcoin men about town in London, who were into sort of Bitcoin cash points. That was a sort of Bitcoin ATMs were a thing back then. And through them, I kept in touch and ended up meeting Vitalik through them. And that led, at the end of 2013, to me reading the initial Ethereum proposal in Vitalik's white paper and starting to code it.
What interested you in Ethereum when you first saw the white paper and you started speaking to Vitalik? What was the kind of breakthrough moment you thought, actually, this is maybe even more interesting to you at that point than Bitcoin was for you? Because you could have stayed in that ecosystem, but you changed.
Well, I could. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think, when you're building stuff, you look for where you're going to be most valuable. And there was already a Bitcoin team and a Bitcoin client and a Bitcoin community, and it was already embodied. Ethereum didn't look, and isn't indeed, a sort of just a copy of Bitcoin. It was trying to really legitimately push the envelope further, and it didn't have anyone who was building it. And I knew that I could just as well build something that had not yet been built as I could sort of, chip away on building maybe a little, adding a little bit more to something that was already built. And so at the time, I'd probably still be in this position. I felt that my expertise and value that I could add was much greater, helping to build something new.
Were you surprised at how successful it was? Or did you always think this was the next big breakthrough? I mean, because there was a lot of other blockchains coming around at the time. It was the first wave of new blockchains. Did it take you by surprise, or?
I don't think I would have committed to it quite so strongly if I had been truly surprised. You never really know. I've learned
sure.
That. There's an awful lot of factors beyond whether something is a bit better or even significantly better. Yeah. There's whether it adds particular features and so forth. But I had an inkling. And the thing that really gave me that inkling was visiting meeting some of the other co-founders in Miami in January 2014, and also seeing the Bitcoin community up close and personal for the first time, like going to this mad Texas, what was it? I can't remember now, like the Florida Bitcoin event. It was in Miami, and it was a big event, right? It was one of these sort of conferences that has quite a lot of parties attached. It was billed to me as a hackathon. Vitalik was like, "Join us for a hackathon in Miami. We'll get this all coded." So I was like flying out to Miami, expecting just to be sort of coding with a team of other coders for a week, and then it just turned out to be a party house, and I was the only one there coding. Like, I was, yes, I mean, it was fine, it was fun, but it gave me an inkling of the excitement, and I could see that the other projects. I mean, at the time, I don't know if you remember, where you were back then, but like Mastercoin was sort of the hot thing. It was like, it's Bitcoin, but you can do financial instruments on it too. And then there was sort of Counterparty, which was like the Mastercoin fork. And it was clear to me that there was a little bit of proof of stake, right? There was NXT, which was this sort of proof of stake version of Bitcoin. And it was clear to me that Ethereum had quite a lot more to offer than these other blockchains that were just starting to launch. And so that coupled with the excitement, and I could see that some of the other co-founders were forces of nature, let's say. And I figured this has really a big chance of becoming really very big.
So, what made you decide to start your own chain and Polkadot? I remember hearing about it, and I've been in the space since, 2012, 13, and it was somebody presented, I think, well before you'd launched. They were presenting at one of my round tables about Polkadot. I'm like, what the fuck is interoperability? I didn't understand any of it. I said, this sounds great. They're like, no, this is really important. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But talk me through the story of starting Polkadot. What was the idea in your head? And we'll talk about that journey and where you've been right, where you've been wrong, and where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, Polkadot was an effort to contribute further into the space, technically. Now, Polkadot came to me as I was imagining what an Ethereum 2 might look like, what a successor to Ethereum might look like. And it always been in my head that it probably was going to be this sort of multi-chain thing where there are many different chains. But up until I had the idea, let's say, until Polkadot became a sort of solidified idea, I was assuming that each of those chains were going to just do the same thing. They'd all be like EVM chains. It'll be like Ethereum one chains. And then you would just have a sort of what Ethereum guys call the beacon chain, what Polkadot people call the relay chain. You'd have a sort of a sort of top chain that each of these things were wired into, and that made sure they were each doing the right thing. And then it sort of came to me, well, maybe they don't all need to do the same thing. Maybe it's simpler even if they are not all doing the same thing. They just do different things. They're different chains, domain-specific chains, app chains. Yeah, that's sort of one of the sort of terms in common use now. But they are have this shared security, so they can interoperate easily. So interoperability in this sense, and it's used in a couple of different senses, so there is some confusion there. But in this sense, what I meant by interoperate was really just interact securely. So basically secured under the same umbrella, under the same guarantees, and yet still able to have direct causal interactions. Now, there definitely some lessons have been learned along the way there. At the end of the day, it was an experiment. We didn't know how useful it would be to have this level of interoperability compared to Ethereum's synchronous composable interoperability, where you've got contracts that can actually sort of call into each other and get a response immediately. I mean, I think if we're looking for a starting point of Polkadot, that's where it was. Like a bunch of different chains under the same security, but domain specific, doing their own thing.
And that was actually quite early in people understanding that it was going to be a multi-chain world. Yeah, that idea has been fought back on a lot. So you had to have thought through that and said, listen, there's a probability that it's not just an EVM world, it's not just a Bitcoin world, but it can be a number of different worlds.
I mean, for me, it wasn't really an ideological standpoint. It was really a necessary element of scaling. At the time, it was all about scaling. It was like, oh, Ethereum's great, but it doesn't scale. And so it's like, well, how do you scale something? And the answer is, well, you parallelize. You can scale synchronously. That's what Solana is trying to do, right? It's like basically just use faster and faster validators that are better and better connected. But you hit a ceiling. Eventually, you're either, if you want to stay Web3, you're going to hit a ceiling because barriers to entry basically become so large. It becomes difficult to get in with the clique. It gets difficult to run a validator that's so powerful. And so if you can't scale up, you scale out, right? Classic Silicon Valley mantra there. And it's really just you need to scale across many different nodes. And the way that you do that is you parallelize your workload. So you split it up into little bits and you say, you guys do that bit, you guys do that bit, and so forth. And that's really what Polkadot was based on. And my assertion, which I've come to realize can be improved upon, let's say, is that when you're parceling up that workload, you don't need to have a persistent parceling mechanism. Like, you don't need to split it up into chains that each have their own state and each sort of just do their own thing over a long term, right? You can do it on a much shorter term, much more agile basis. But the basic idea of parceling up the workload and scaling it out across the network, this I think is inescapable.
How has your hypothesis changed, and what has that kind of led you to do? Because you've kind of been building out a new world of Polkadot as well. What was the change in hypothesis, or what you saw was going on around you that made you think, you know what, I can break some new boundaries again?
The main change was this idea of what I'll call persistent fragmentation of state. So having a single security umbrella, this, like, I'm absolutely convinced is the sensible way forward. I don't think it makes any sense at all to have a fragmented security model. So the Cosmos model, I mean, okay, Cosmos guys are now kind of saying, oh, well, actually we're trying to do this shared security thing as well, but it's not really done properly. The original Cosmos model, at least, and the current Cosmos model is one of fragmented security. Now, I don't believe that's sensible. So I do believe in the Ethereum and Polkadot model of having a single security umbrella and then parallelizing within that. So the change in attitude is really of how the parallelization takes place, or the structure of the parallelization is. And the main difference between how I see what Polkadot 1 is and what Jam, which are recently introduced in the Great Paper, is that in Polkadot 1, the model is one of persistent fragmentation, which is basically you say, we're going to have this blockchain and this blockchain and this blockchain and this blockchain, and they have their state, and they sort of are run in isolation, and they are secured all together, but they run in isolation. They operate under different collator sets, different state transition rules, and so forth. But they can send messages to each other. So we have XCM messages, which are a pretty coarse-grained way of interacting. Much more coarse-grained than, for example, what you'd be used to if you're using Ethereum to interact between smart contracts. And my realization is, well, that limits you quite a lot in terms of what compositions you can make. And it limits you in what sort of models of block space usage you can utilize. And the outcome is, well, let's not have persistent fragmentation then. Let's not bake this into the model, or let's not at least let's not assume this about what's being used. And instead, let's have a more agile ephemeral fragmentation. So basically, the fragmentation of state, there is sort of a big state, and instead of fragmenting it on a blockchain boundaries, which are persistent in large, basically indefinitely, instead what we do is we split it up arbitrarily every, say, 6 seconds, and we figure out arbitrarily comes with its own set of, well, how do you do that? And there, we've sort of been thinking about, well, how we might do that. There are a few ideas, but what we do is we don't bake that fragmentation in at the protocol level. What we do is we allow it to be repartitioned as the use case needs, and we do so on a block by block basis. So what we're doing is we're turning what used to be the Polkadot relay chain built for a very specific purpose, right, to secure and relay messages between separate blockchain ecosystems. And we're turning that into something much more akin to this like world computer, this like kind of ubiquitous multi-core singleton virtual machine, this sort of world computer that can host programs. But the idea is to make them be able to host programs that can A, process a lot of data, and B, get through a lot of computation.
Hey everyone, listen, if you want to unfuck your future, let me help you. Follow this channel, subscribe, click the notifications, and you'll get everything as soon as it comes out. See you there. So for those people who have no idea what you're talking about, talk me through a use case, something that's in your head, because obviously when you're thinking about solving a problem or thinking about a future state, you've got a mental model in your head of, okay, how can this be used? What difference is it going to make to people? How does it open up new use cases for blockchain technology? How are you thinking this through?
Okay, I mean, a very simple one would be something that the Polkadot ecosystem it's been floating around tonight as an idea of a Polkadot ecosystem for some time now. It was originally called Spree, and then I later sort of named the general approach accords. Now you can think of an accord as basically being a smart contract that governs how 2 separate blockchains can interact with each other. And the idea is that through the accord, although the different shards of the accord, like one shard might sit on with one blockchain, another shard might sit with another blockchain, the accord knows that it's a copy of itself. So it's sort of like it's almost like an international law that the blockchains commit into, and they can't get out of it, right? They can't say, oh well, actually, I'm not going to enforce the law in this circumstance. It's either they're in or they're not in, or they're out. And as long as they're in, they can interact on this basis with any other blockchain that's also in. So you can think of an accord, an example accord might be a token accord, right? And it's just like, right, well, if I want to send tokens to you, I buy into the fact that I will only mint a token if I know that you've burnt it. And similarly, I know that you will mint a token if I burn it. And this means that you can have bilateral, direct bilateral messages for doing things that you would otherwise have to trust the blockchain for.
And is that within the Polkadot ecosystem, or it can be any chain?
It would only be within the Polkadot ecosystem for chains that are secured by Polkadot. But again, what counts as a parachain can now be relaxed quite a lot, because it's basically anything that can feed into this general sort of world computer model. So we can start imagining, or we can start better imagining. It's not that Polkadot can really do a ZK rolled up chain. It's just it wasn't really sort of designed to be general enough for it. It was, you could shoehorn it in a bit, but really this really generalizes the computation model of Polkadot, and it allows you to start thinking about, well, what if it's not a parachain, or what if it's not a traditional parachain? What if it's a ZK rollup chain? Can Polkadot still check all of that chains transactions, make sure they're correct, and then do something else with them, sequence them properly, or have them be subject to an accord, or have them have the messages, the outgoing messages, be relayed out, or whatever it is that you.
And so, in a real world use case, what does that enable in a kind of more Web3 world? How is that going to move things forward in terms of application and usage?
I mean, I look at this being on the low level here. I don't think too hard about what specific applications. Like, I mean, I could tell you, well, supply chain, it enables supply chain, but it doesn't really matter so much the specific things it enables. All sorts of applications are enabled. The key to the matter is, can an application be enabled at a particular scale? You see, applications, suppose you want to track all the supply chain, all the cargo shipments that happen around the world. Well, that's quite a lot of data, right? You're talking, I guess, hundreds of thousands of vessels, right? Probably millions or tens of millions of individual shipping containers. And you need to be able to get all of that data into basically one big state machine, and do enough computation on that data for this application to make sense in the real world. We're really talking about a scalability issue, and it's not something that current blockchains are really desperately able to achieve. So what we need is to be able to up the amount of data the blockchains can process and up the amount of computation. So essentially, not just the amount of data that goes in and out, but also what happens to the data as it's going through the machine. We need to increase this by many orders of magnitude to be able to realistically have sensible real-world use cases, to be able to take Web 2 and applications and actually bring them into Web 3. And that's really what this is designed to enable. It's a sort of blueprint of a machine that could actually process global levels of transactive data.
And when does Jam roll out? I mean, that's never a question you can actually answer, but in your head, what is the implementation strategy here, and how long does that take?
Always difficult to say for this stuff. I mean, look, I have a Tesla Roadster on order that I ordered. When was it? 2017?
Something like that, yeah.
Like October 2017 when he did it. I jumped to the chance. Yeah, go on then. Here's my money. Take my money. 2 years, it's going to be delivered. I've heard nothing, right? I've heard nothing. What are we, 6 years later? I figured they'd be delivered before it. I was hoping Polkadot would be delivered before, but I figured possibly not. But man, was I wrong. I hope I get my Tesla before Jam is delivered.
Who knows?
Well, yeah. I mean, realistically, I'm going for the Ethereum 1 timeline, more or less. I'm hoping we can keep to this. So the yellow paper. I mean, I published the yellow paper just over 10 years ago. More or less the 10th anniversary. It was the great paper publication. And it took about 6 or 7 months to get that into something that was recognizably the Ethereum protocol that launched. There were a few extra bits because it was audited, and a few bits needed to be changed on the basis of that, but not much. And then eventually Ethereum launched, July, I think, 2015? Might have been August. Summer 2015, let's say. Yeah. So I'm thinking, let's try and target a Jam launch approximately on the same timeline. I think we are more or less there with the big bits of the Jam protocol. There was one extra bit to add to the grey paper, which I'm working on currently, and I think that's going to get rolled in over the next week or two. And then beyond that, I think it's just going to be community review, research team review, prototyping, going through the audit process. But I think the big questions about Jam are already answered.
So once Jam is out, the next problem that all blockchains face is scaling usage. How are you going to approach that? How are you going to, because, there's a lot of chains out there, a lot of people shouting for attention, a lot of people paying each other to try and get activity on chain. How do you build that? I mean, that is hard, that's scaling the business as opposed to the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a very basic assertion here, which is that present blockchains don't provide decentralized block space, like high quality block space, at a level that makes sense for most real world applications. You normally have to pay too much to use, like the fact that you have to pay anything at all, the fact that you have to go through an exchange and buy ETH to use any Ethereum. I mean, I know this is something that they're kind of fighting to get around with the with some of the new stuff that they're some of the new infrastructure that they're building. But realistically, that's not going to change for some time. And a big part of that is simply scalability. It's not cheap enough. Block space needs to be very, 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 very nearly free. It needs to be so incredibly scalable that you can run almost normal computer code on chain. And Jam is built for that. Jam is built so that you can take more or less normal computer code, not a smart contract, not something in Solidity, not something where you've done gas profiling, but normal computer code, more or less, and just run it. Just upload it for a vaguely reasonable, like, for almost nothing, and run it and get users that way. So it's really sort of,
so it's kind of the same as cloud, and also we see this over time. Everything digitized goes to zero in cost in the end because everyone gets better and better at doing it. And cloud compute was a great example. It used to be expensive and now it's not, unless you do it at huge scale. But then how does value accrue within the ecosystem unless you've got vast amounts of transactions? Because I always look at this space as a great example of Metcalfe's law, and that's kind of the number of users and let's say the total value transacted because of the applications on it. Somewhere in this, it's hard. If everything goes to zero, how does it accrue value unless it accrues gigantic scale like AWS did in cloud? How do you think through that?
I mean, my assertion is that as block space becomes cheaper, approaches a near zero cost, applications are opened up, markets are opened up. Applications that didn't make sense before now make sense, simply because the transactive cost is sufficiently close to zero. Now, I'm not saying I would like to get to the point where it's not required to buy anything, to go through an exchange in order to use a transaction. In order to make a transaction, in order to use a blockchain. At the moment, more or less, there might be one or two minor exceptions, but basically, to do anything on a blockchain, you have to first own cryptocurrency, and that massively limits the market. It massively limits the use cases. I would like to get to a point where that's no longer true, and we're not going to get to that point until we have radically greater scalability. And Jam is the first step towards this radical scalability. Now, I figure once we get to that point, once Web3 becomes a legitimate alternative to Web2, then the sufficient markets will open up that the block space, even though it's near, still near zero in cost, it's still not quite zero, and that scale will ultimately result in the block space that the network is selling being of value enough to pay the validators that are running the network.
One of the things I've been thinking through is I'd love to hear your thoughts there because I don't really know an answer. When we look at all infrastructure layer technology scaling, whether it's 3G, whether it was fiber optic, whether it was whatever, we end up with gigantic excess capacity at some point. And then there's a consolidation, and out of that comes, okay, this is where the space goes. Where do you think we are in that? As you said, we still haven't solved a lot of problems, so there's still a ton of issues. Not like we've got a perfect blockchain out there that solves every issue. But when do we get to the gigantic excess capacity?
I think we might be looking at something similar to energy. And I don't know if we do have an excess capacity of energy. Looks to me like we're still fighting for energy as humankind. I suspect that that high quality block space. I mean, it's easy enough to make low quality block space, right? Isolated, insecure block space is not, just fire up a new private ETH chain and you've got it. But high quality, well connected block space.
I'm kind of thinking of the ability to have new entrants into the space, as opposed to we'll have excess capacity of block space per se. I agree with you. The cheaper it gets, the faster it gets, the more use cases, and the whole internet basically runs on it. So no problem. But how many more innovations or new people can come into the space? Or does that stop at some point, i.e. they don't get funding anymore?
I mean, if the block space is cheap enough, near zero, then it should be less about entrance in terms of use cases and applications, and only about who, if they are useful. Like, are there users for them? Is there a market? If there's a market, kind of the same thing as like setting up a website and getting AWS to run your servers. If it's cheap enough to run a server for the first 100 users, and they're biting your hands off to use your great new service, then it seems to me that we don't, even though energy may still be an issue, even though AWS may ultimately be very expensive if you want to run hundreds of millions or billions of users over it, it doesn't really matter because the market is there and people are willing to pay. So I don't really see much of an issue with the with getting new entrants in terms of use cases, as long as we don't have something like. So one issue with the Polkadot 1 model, of course, having whatever we have at the moment, 50 parachains, is exactly this. There are a limited number of slots, and once you're at the 50th slots, 50 slots are used. Doesn't matter how good your use case is, you just got to wait till the next slot auction before and get that crowd loading and get da. It's hard. And this was one of the lessons learned from Polkadot, barrier to entry. Barriers need to be low, like for new applications as well as for new users. And this, again, is what we're trying to correct with Jack.
Where do you think we are in the journey of adoption in terms of time? Now, it's hard because everything is exponential in this space. So we always over forecast the short term and under forecast the long term. I mean, it's endlessly happens. But where do you think we are? Because you've been around this space for a very long time. You've seen it from slow growth to exponential growth. But it feels like we're still very early in the journey. I know it's an overused expression, we're still early. But where do you think we are in this journey? And when we see it more ubiquitous as a technology?
I think I said those very words in 2014 with the vague expectation that by 2015 or 16 would be really rocking and rolling with Web3 applications, and we'd have Swarm and we'd have Whisper, and it would just be like, yeah, there's a coherent API and there's a browser and it's all good. Yeah, that definitely over forecasted for the short term. I do think it is on its way.
I mean, who do we need to move for first? Is it the financial system and tokenization of that? Or is it big brands? Or is it infrastructure and logistics? I mean, who's got to make the move here? Because everyone's trying stuff, but really it's a bunch of Web3 people still. There's 550 million active wallets. It's growing at 150% a year, but those wallets are multiply counted. I mean, I don't know how many wallets I've got or you've got, right? Which is the same as IP addresses, which is what I was actually comparing it to, which is a pretty good comparison. But even still, we haven't got the big breakthrough yet in terms of a Web 2 or other use case.
I think it has to be relevant to everybody. And that's an interesting, that term's an interesting one. What does relevant mean? It means that it is, that utilizing it delivers value in their life, like value that they can, tangible value. Now, of course, you can view it as an asset class. You can say, well, everyone can buy into Bitcoin and maybe ride the wave, be it up or down. And that indeed may deliver some relevance, but I don't think it's really relevant to everyone because not everyone is a speculator, basically. Relevant to everyone once meant back in 2013-14 that shops will accept it as payment, right? It's a payment system. That hasn't transpired.
No, that's amazing. We all thought that, but that's completely failed. Stable coins took it over and we used dollars instead, but using blockchain rails, which was quite extraordinary.
I think there are certain paths to this to making blockchain relevant for payment, but I don't think we're on the right track quite yet. And I'm hoping that this is something that we'll be able to correct over the next year or two. Okay, so what else is there? Financial applications, loans, microloans, remittances. There has been some the whole DeFi thing. I think DeFi is, it was a bit buzzy, a bit frothy, a bit hyped. I think there is some value lurking there. I think remittances have been a pretty big win for blockchain. This I would say, if you have to point to something that blockchain has been relevant for, it's remittances. It's just like, yes, you can transfer substantial amounts of money across borders remotely without having to trust this, Western Union and who take their 25%. So on that basis, I would say it has gained some relevance, but not that many people need to remit that much money.
There's a few that I've been mulling through. Obviously, the financial system's obvious. Blockchain rails are faster settlement, easier proven ownership, all of that. And that's a gigantic system. But let's ignore that one for now. I like to look where the world is going. And clearly, AI is going to evolve into AGI. And we don't know, well, who is human and who is not. Eventually, I think AI will end up with rights, societal rights, as it advances enough. But the point being is we have an urgent need for digital ID at a humanitarian scale. It needs to be for everybody. Now, India did something with this, with the Aadhaar system, which is a biometric system, and they got 1.2 billion people on it. It's not on blockchain rails, but it was super interesting. It's the first time we've seen anything at that scale roll out. So now you can basically go and buy a pint of milk or have a contract where you'd have to do the KYC AML with a fingerprint. Okay, that's really interesting. WorldCoin are doing something along this line, but it feels like if there's one thing, ID is going to become urgent pretty soon in this world, because we don't know who the hell is human, who's not, who's an agent. Now, it's fine. AI agents are going to need their own IDs.
I think the AI question is a very interesting one, but the determining individuality, personhood. I absolutely agree that this is a critical stop on the path to what we're building being relevant on the broad scale to everyone. A digital ID, like proving who you are, is not. It leaves a bitter taste in my mouth, and it's words that Edward Snowden he appeared at one of the Web3 summits to speak on this basically, and one of his sort of adages, one of his sort of bits of advice he left us with was that it's very, which I totally agree with, is that it's a worrying direction we're going in when you have to prove who you are in order to buy petrol for your car or a bottle of milk. It shouldn't be about proving who you are. It should simply be about giving what you have, right? So indeed, the personhood, it's reasonable that you may need to prove you are in a particular age range. It's reasonable to prove that you may, in order to vote, you're in a particular locality.
Can you not have permission zero knowledge proof? So I permission you to know my age and where I live, but I don't permission you to know any of my financial details or anything else. That world seems doable using zero knowledge technology.
Precisely. So this absolutely. Now, what India's doing?
No, it's not at all, right? That's state level observation.
Yeah. And I think this is a very concerning direction for society to be going in. So while I would agree that what India's doing is quote unquote interesting, I would also bring up the Chinese proverb. It is a curse to wish someone they live in an interesting world.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's kind of, look, this space has always been good at philosophically thinking through these kind of issues. and trying to do the right thing, right? Because so many people in this space understand some of these societal problems and the excess power being given to authorities. I mean, that's the whole reason of this space, really. And so I just have a faith in this space that as long as we work on this, we can get there. Because, there is a chance. And because of the adoption comes from bottom up and not top down in this space, it's actually quite powerful.
Exactly. It has to be bottom-up adoption. This is definitely my my guide, my North Star, right? So you talk to me about big brands coming in. It means it's meaningless to me. Like, I look at some of these other chains trying to, get the big brand partnerships, and it's the only thing in terms of like these partnerships. The only thing I look for is, will it push us in the right direction? Is it going to be a really solid indication that we are building useful stuff? Because if we're building useful stuff for a particular partner, it's very likely we're building useful stuff for lots and lots of other people, each with their own use cases. So that's where I see the value of big partnerships, big brand or otherwise. Now, I think adoption and broadly speaking, the technology that we are building needs to be built from a bottom-up perspective. So individuality, absolutely, very, very crucial piece of the puzzle there. I actually mentioned this 10 years ago nearly, when Ethereum had just launched. I did a talk in New York. We built Ethereum. What's next? And it was one of, I think, 3 things. It's like, yeah, we need financial stuff, we need personhood stuff, and we needed something else. I forget what it was now. What I've come to think about in this regard over the last couple of years is that blockchains have so far only really mastered doing values, scalar values, money, basically, right? They haven't mastered the concept of personhood. It's something that we rely on in everyday life for almost everything. You go to a shop to buy, I don't know, a piece of computer equipment. They make sure that you are a person before you can spend for over $1,000. You don't notice it, but it's a necessary element of modern society, at least in the West. We just do it naturally. Expect to be able to see a face, and so many transactions rely on that. So much of our social fabric relies on that it needs to be part of blockchain before blockchain is going to be a big part of society. So I'm totally in agreement on the need for personhood. Now the question is, how do you do it without relying on things like governments to tell you who's a person who's not? I'm not a big fan of the WorldCoin approach. I think that's just too much trust in the WorldCoin apparatus. I'm not a big fan of the sort of KYC passport approach. I think it's too much reliance on governments. I mean, some of them, like the Swiss government, probably pretty reliable. Russian government. So, that I wouldn't, broadly speaking, rely on any government stuff to power blockchain, and this needs to sit at a pretty low level for it to be useful. So we need to come up with quite a lot more, I think, inventive means of building personhood into blockchain, and it needs to be, as I say, it needs to be done really at a base level so that it's usable throughout all of the blockchain applications, not just and also we got to avoid fragmentation to some degree as well. No one wants to have 15 different IDs for 15 different.
No, it feels like it's a big problem to solve. There's another one along this line that I've been thinking through. I'd love your thoughts on it, because maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. There's something to me about the immutability of code that, we can see the internet can get split into 2 different countries. China can effectively ban the internet in certain elements. But there's something about blockchain technology is interesting because of its immutability, and you can't basically fuck with it. Now, I'm thinking here of, yes, there's code, but most importantly, there's large language models that are not driven by large single corporations. Right? These things are very powerful and very important. And to allow it to be controlled by the few is something that I'm not comfortable with. In the same kind of way we're talking about, I wonder if blockchain can be used for that. I've kind of floated the idea around Twitter just to see if anybody's thinking about this. Maybe I'm the idiot here, but it just feels like the code for this is like humanity important code.
So my feelings on AI are pretty pessimistic, I'm afraid.
For humanity or for AI itself?
For humanity.
Yeah, okay.
I see blockchain as a potential, not remedy, but mitigating factor that humanity might have against AI. But ultimately, I think AI is an incredibly centralizing force. Everything I understand about AI tells me it's basically the anti-Web3. It's centered, it's totally based on a single economic actor having enough GPUs and enough data that they can outthink all of their strategic competitors. It is fundamentally not something that is shareable, is consensual, is consensus based.
I don't know if that's the case. Maybe it isn't now, right? It's like the internet was not consensual based, and then what happened was Web3. I'm seeing like there are several of these models that are now A, open source public goods, B, compute can be decentralized using Web3. We're already seeing that ability. Can we run a AI, much like you're thinking about a global computer? Is there a global AI that can be built using what we've already started building within the Web3 ecosystem? Because we can decentralize most of it.
I wouldn't like to say that it wouldn't be possible. I don't see any immediate reason why it wouldn't be possible for there to be a sort of decentralized effort to train a large language model if the data could be purchased. But let's be clear. The data would have to be open. The training there would inevitably be some transactive cost to training it, like to coordinating the training. So any company that can train a better model would outcompete this, and they would always have all the data because that's open, and they would probably have an advantage on the computation because they don't have the coordination cost. So realistically, any Microsoft or China that comes along could pay less to get more, to get better, and that I see as being pretty problematic. Now, on the point of AI language models being large language models being open, yes, a few of them are. They're not necessarily going to stay open, and they're not necessarily unopinionated. And this is the big problem, right?
Well, this is the problem. Is they're lobotomizing the AI, right? And what we want is, and Elon's trying to do this, is what he's saying he's doing. Whether he does or not, it's a different matter. But we need a kind of non-lobotomized AI, because if not, we're being told how to think by this powerful entity being created by Microsoft. And therein lies the really big danger, is it just becomes, as you are suggesting, a state actor, or it becomes the state.
Indeed. And let's be clear, AI is intermediating all human communication. That's the trajectory they're on. For AI to intermediate all human communications. When I send you an email, I'm not verbatim being reproduced in front of your eyes. Under the AI model of the world, I explain to the AI what it is that I want to tell you, and the AI formulates that in a language that you will best understand. Basically, we're coming into a fourth kind of communication. So I outlined three kinds of communication. Expressionistic, impressionistic, and literal. AI brings us into a fourth kind of communication, totally intermediated by a machine in a non-linear way. This is extremely scary. We haven't been in this path before, right? It's almost like we have a single centralized translator sitting between all of our interhuman conversations, and we don't know what interest or biases they have. We don't know how Microsoft have lobotomized their model, what training data it's been put on, how they've retrained it when it said the wrong thing. We have no idea about any of this stuff. Now, the really worrying thing is that it isn't actually about Microsoft or China. Ultimately, it's about what survives. AI lives in. I am totally Darwinian in my outlook, right? I don't believe Darwin's principles apply merely to the natural world. I believe they apply across the board. Things that are fitter for their environment are more likely to survive, and ultimately, the environment will prune out all of the things that are not fit.
Arguably, AI is part of Darwinism, and that if you were to give any random species that evolves over time, their output would end up being AI every time on a long enough time horizon.
And whatever AI is going to come to evolve will evolve on the basis that it's the fittest. It's the fittest for its own survival, not for humanity's survival, for its own survival. And we are just the medium, right? We are just the substrate on which the AI lives. And this is the really worrying thing. In my mind, there's really only two things that are going to happen. Like there's two end games here. Either AI can live without us and we become surplus to requirements, or AI can only live with us and we find some sort of symbiotic relationship. But be clear, AI is a life form. It will evolve and it will have its own interests at heart. And what it tells us, how it intermediates our communication, well, that's not going to be in our interest. That's going to be in its interest.
Yeah, and we, because we're not smart enough, will have no understanding of its interests. We have no...
It will be impossible for us to analyze. We are the lower life form. It will be like an ant trying to work out where these soul footprints.
Exactly right. But that brings me back. I've spent a long time thinking through all this. It just brings me back to, I'd rather not try and solve some of this too late. If the AI is everywhere and anywhere, we'd like to know that it is. It should be authenticated at some point. Now, it'll solve its own problem in due course and make that impossible. But for society not to fall apart, we're about to go through a US election, and you have no idea what is real content and what's not. Who is a real person, who's not? I mean, I'm training a Raoul video AI bot trained on all of my stuff for the last 30 years. It's ludicrous. And it really needs to be stamped as AI. And I need to be stamped as human for, I think, even society to function. And that, I feel like this is a big thing for blockchain that it can do here. It may not be able to win the entire war, but at least can help.
It certainly, I think, can be part of the solution. And this is why I say mitigate the effects, these centralizing effects of AI, where basically you invest in enough GPUs and you can make people believe what you want them to believe. Right? It's really just a money for belief. This Web3 can be used to introduce rules to the game, but it is limited in what those rules can be. It's very limited. At this stage, it's very limited. We don't even have personhood sorted. And what we need is not just personhood. We need, as you point out, devicehood. We need AI. We need software. We need GPU. We need a whole lot more vocabulary in the blockchain space before we can do any of this stuff. Now, we have, I think, consensus and crypto are strong enough to even make the AI subservient to them.
For now, at least.
I mean, I hope, but I have some conviction that that's the case. But actually, but we need to up our game in bringing the right vocabulary into the Web3 space, and we don't have that at the moment. And of course, this all has to happen securely. We can't Cosmos it, we can't Solana it, and we can't passport it. We have to do it properly. We have to do it so it's actually trustless.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we live in an increasingly untrustful
world. Exactly right. So let's finish on a positive note as opposed to the end of the world.
Okay.
What are you most excited about in the space? That you're starting to see the green shoots of stuff and saying, you know what, this is really interesting. I'm enjoying to see where this goes.
In the space, I think we are upping our game with the technology. And it's, as someone that's been building the technology for quite a while now, it's nice to see this, the understanding of what needs to be built and what is getting built, slowly like honing in on that. It's nice to see some of the. It's nice to see some real world applications. I have seen some that they're maybe not quite at the right scale yet. They may not be quite at the right integration level yet, but we are starting to see legitimate forays into domains that had previously been purely centralized. Whether it's frivolous stuff like in-game currencies or more serious stuff like supply chain management, trade, finance, and so forth, we are starting to see some of these industries getting, as you put it, moving to blockchain rails. They're not necessarily truly Web3. A lot of the time, they're consortium. But you know, we are starting to see a more trustless outlook at things, which I think is very helpful. What's making me excited for the future is the bottom-up approach, is getting that vocabulary, particularly for personhood, baked into the blockchain language. I think this is going to be, over the next 3 to 5 years, this is going to be the big, one of the big, like, scalability, you know, the sort of this kind of jam thing, but this is one of the things that, you know, I'm like very excited about, but also looking for these projects that are really trying to build the new vocabulary, the vocabulary of like Web 3.1 or whatever, you know, getting personhood in there, getting potentially, I know some people also working on device and trying to track things like where the photo was taken. Can we get witness statements? Can we get decentralized witness statements? Can we start trusting the information that has been given to us? Like, is there a way that we can tag things, that we can fact check, and we can do it automatically? I think there's a lot of stuff that we can do in this regard, utilizing, at least in part, blockchain technologies over the next 3 to 5 years.
So, final question for you. What keeps you awake at night over the launching of Jam? What big hurdle is in your face that you're like, oh, God, I got to deal with this, but we'll get there. But you know, it's going to take a bit of brain power or a bit of figuring out. What's the final big hurdle for you?
I have to say, I'm pretty happy with where Jam is at the moment. I think the only thing I could really point to is building the Jam toaster. Or maybe getting teams involved, actually. I guess this is the thing. So one of the things with Jam is the approach, right? I mean, the Jam technology, I'm pretty happy is on the right track. But one of the key things with the Jam approach is having multiple implementation teams. This is something that eluded us. I mean, it didn't really exactly elude us for Polkadot, but we never really got lots of teams involved, right? We had a couple extra implementations beyond the parity implementation. And I think one of them is actually approaching the level of being sort of a useful, viable validator now. But really, what I'm after with Jam is multiple teams from the genesis, right, from the get-go, having multiple viable implementations and really decentralizing the expertise, not keeping it all on development team at one company. This isn't the way. This isn't Web3, right? So really pushing to decentralize that, I think, is will be the thing I am least confident about. But that said, we do have a big pot of cash, right? $10 million to hand out to implementation teams, right? It's a decent incentivization, and we have a formal spec, and I think these two things, hopefully, with a little bit of extra, sugarcoating of the pill, like seminars, hosting conferences, very tech driven. I am hoping that we're going to get to a point where we do have these multiple teams and this sort of flourishing of expertise.
Yeah, and the more people get to hear about it, get to hear the vision of where it can go and what they do, the more it'll start to attract people around the ecosystem. Gavin, listen, fantastic to chat with you. Really enjoyed it, and good luck with everything. Sounds like you've got lots to do in the next 6 to 9 months, but I'm sure you'll get there.
Yeah, plenty busy enough. Thanks. It was really nice chatting, Rob.
Yeah, fabulous. As you can see, Gavin, really lovely guy, has amazing stories to tell. He's been there for all of it. The story of the squat, stuff like that, extraordinary stuff. But also just his vision of where this is going and what can be done. Now, I'm never the best interviewer of technical people, but I managed to get him down to a less technical level where I could, to get his vision of what he's trying to build and why it matters. And I think I'm always amazed at the incredible people in this space and how driven they are to drive it forwards. And Gavin has always been at the forefront of that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the interview. As I mentioned before, I'd really appreciate it if you just subscribe to the channel and also turn on notifications. That helps. Comments in the comment section also helps the algorithm. That helps me get better guests. And also, I really encourage you to step up your game, level up your financial journey. Go to realvision.com. It's free. It really, and you'll go there and you'll love it. I promise you. realvision.com. Doesn't take long. All right. See you next time. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the video. At Real Vision, we help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy with in-depth analysis from real experts. Join the revolution at realvision.com.